The only thing that scares me more than space aliens is the idea that there aren't any space aliens. We can't be the best that creation has to offer. I pray we're not all there is. If so, we're in big trouble. And with these words from Ellen DeGeneres, I would like to welcome you to Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are an inclusive community grounded in love, offering a spiritual home for seekers of all ages. We actively live our values of diversity, compassion, and justice, extending that care to the earth and this land, the traditional home of the Chumash peoples. We offer our deep gratitude for their enduring stewardship. I'm John Fennessy, a member of the worship ministry, and I'm honored to serve as your worship associate this morning, assisting Reverend Jonathan on our voyage beyond the stars. Now let's pause, settle, and breathe as we move into our time of worship. In Unitarian Universalist congregations around the world, the symbol of the lighted flame in a chalice unites members in worship and symbolizes our faith in action. It represents the warmth of community and the flame of hope. The flaming chalice, like our faith, stands open to receive new truths that pass the tests of reason, justice, and compassion. Let us join our voices together by reading the chalice lighting words written by Jennifer Grayson from Embrace the Night, which you will find in your orders of service or on our screens. Universal mystery, guide us away from the desire to shine light in all the corners. Teach us to embrace the night, for without the darkness, we never see the stars.
Welcome to this house of memory and celebration. To begin, I have a poem. It's a little long. It's called Night Sky. It's by Don Bogan. Staring at the stars, I imagine you vanished and dispersed in that unreachable clarity of light. They glisten, sharp and cold, vast distances apart, yet coming to their marks the same time every night of their season. The seasons slowly move, carrying their forms. I recognize so few. Orion with his belt dominating winter, a wobbly W, the Dipper's angled box, the handle, each bright dot individually jeweled there. Nothing there is fixed, not even that clear star that seems always to point just one way as it speeds farther and farther off. All of them are whirling on their separate paths, circles, ellipses, poles of radiance that spread the dark. What can be made of that? If you are nothing now but memory, the stars seem a proper home. Long after the sun swells to disperse the earth, they'll change, as you have. Light vanishing with time, light beyond the reach of light itself. Staring at the light, an explosion sent from some place nowhere now, I know it will outlast whatever I become. Imagining its end, I see it moving still, when nothing can be seen, and we are both nothing, everywhere. Let us be in a spirit of meditation. Be comfortable in your seat, settle down, Notice your feet on the floor representing the ground that we're connected to the earth. This is a poem called Stars by Sarah Teasdale. Alone in the night on a dark hill, with pines around me, spicy and still, and a heaven full of stars over my head, white and topaz and misty red, myriads with beating hearts of fire that aeons cannot vex or tire. Up the dome of heaven like a great hill I watch them marching stately and still, and I know that I am honored to be witness of so much majesty. Let's take a few moments to ponder a text, not from the scriptures, from the movies. Contact, a 1997 film based on an earlier novel by Carl Sagan, the famous scientist. It's one of many we could have chosen. I happen to like this one, so we're doing this one. But these movies that come to us, science fiction, speculating on whether there is life on other planets, intelligent contact that might be reached somehow, they are inspiring. They are religious, sometimes intentionally so. And Sagan's idea that maybe science and religion could be bridged, could somehow find a way to coexist, is something worthy of our reflection. Using the story, any story, as a meditation is to open to the imagery, is to open to the visual dimension. So movies are stories, but stories are like movies. Long before we had film cinematic presentation of images, if you read a short story or a novel or a poem, all these images come. They are metaphors. They are figurative openings to something beyond themselves. That's where I want to go. So follow me. We're not staying with the literal. We're going to the figurative, to the hidden meanings in the images in this story. Alien abduction stories are a little like fishing, if you think of it from the point of view of the fish. In catch and release fishing, you trick the fish with fake food and pull them out. You take pictures and drop them back in the water, no doubt leaving them confused. This is the same way aliens treat humans. What was that? Okay. Have you ever noticed that in the reports, aliens choose unusual landing spots somewhere near a pig farm in Alabama somewhere? That's because they're searching for intelligent life. You'll notice the UFOs stay away from Washington, D.C. completely. We begin in this movie story on Earth, and the point of view is pulling back. We see Earth sort of off into the distance, and we're hearing something, some static and some broadcast sounds, TV, just the clutter of all kinds of different broadcast signals. And then we start to notice, we hear Nixon saying, "I'm not a crook." We're still arguing about that one. We hear, it's a great frontier, JFK, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. We get it, we're going back in time. No, what we're getting is as we move away, we're getting earlier traces of broadcasts that went out long ago that are traveling light years. And who knows, maybe somebody has a very big antenna somewhere and can tune in. They'd probably be confused by the commercials. Science fiction stories are very popular in the movies, very popular in the bestseller list. What are they all about? They're a little bit about science. They're speculative, and they're an area of literature that allows wonder to come in, imagine possibilities. So, sorting out the prospects of whether there are beings out there, whether we have had contact, whether we can have contact, It's complicated. That's why we need a lot of sci-fi novels and movies, different speculations, and maybe in the discussion period we can go through some of that. At the moment, I want to stay with this one idea that's presented in this story. To try to boil all of those possibilities down to two options, well, either there are or there aren't, misses the point. It's really complicated. It's really mystery. It's really beyond our grasp, and the spectrum is wide. The possibilities are many. I've been on a number of radio interview programs and podcast things where people are very interested in this and tangible. We are sure there has been contact. The pyramids could not have been built without some kind of intelligence beyond what was available in the time. As Christina says, lies. No, is that, or more to be kindly, mistake. I don't think you really have studied ancient Egyptian civilization and grasped the level of math they had achieved and the resources they were willing to put to bear. They had the wealth of one of the wealthiest, probably the wealthiest nation on earth at that time, rich agricultural, and complete devotion of the entire nation. Those were not slaves that built the pyramids. Those were volunteers. They were the faithful. They wanted to be part of that. And being agricultural, they had huge blocks of every year that they could spend moving blocks. And they had rollers and they had barges and there was water nearby. It was done. And the calculations were precise because they didn't have computers. They had this kind of computer and years and years and years and years to get it right. So it's an insult to human intelligence to think, oh, no, we needed help. Maybe not. Maybe we were bright enough. After the little light show at the beginning of the movie, we find ourselves looking at an eye. Yes, a child's eye. This is Ellie Arroway, our heroine. And immediately we're being told visually in the story, we're looking at outer space and inner space, and they are profoundly connected. Since we have mystery, we have a lot of imagination. It's a very open canvas, a very large canvas. And she's sitting at a ham radio. She's 9 years old. Ellie Arroway is a science geek. She's extraordinarily intelligent, and the school told her father, her mother died in complications of childbirth, but her father's very devoted, and the school people said, to the degree that you can afford it, buy science gear, whatever, to allow her to develop this, because she's got an incredible aptitude. So one of the things is a ham radio. And she's there, you call out your call number, then you say, come back, and you come back, anybody there, and you call out your number, come back. And if you do it long enough, somebody says, yeah, oh, here, and they give their call number. It's interesting that little catchphrase, that's it, come back, which is to say, please log on, please turn your mic on and let me hear you. And she is very diligent. And in the little scene that opens our story, somebody in Pensacola, Florida, has, well, how far is that, Dad? And he says, I'll give you a hint, orange juice. And she says, hey, how's the weather there in Florida? And they have a little chat, back and back. And then the father, they've got a map there, they're somewhere in Wisconsin, and he puts a little bit of yarn over to another pin, and that's our longest yet, all the way down to Florida. And we see a seeker, someone who wants to make contact, someone who wants to reach out. And they talk afterward. Do you think if we had a really strong radio with a really big antenna, we could reach Mom? Sparks, I don't think even the biggest radio in the world can reach that far. That night, just before bed, she makes a little drawing of Pensacola, Florida, what she imagines it looks like, a little curved beach, a palm tree. Hey, Dad, do you think there's people on other planets? I don't know, Sparks, but I guess I'd say if it's just us, seems like an awful waste of space. And the story is a sad one. The father dies. She's 9 years old. She runs for his medicine, too late. Gets back on the CB radio that night. Dad, are you there? Come back. Dad, are you there? Dad, this is Ellie. Come back. Her grief, her yearning has turned to the heavens. This is the call, and immediately the movie flashes to her adult job, which is being a scientist, SETI, the huge radio telescope the size of a city in Puerto Rico, listening to the heavens. She graduated from MIT, PhD from Caltech, not a bad school, was offered a tenured track position at Harvard, turned it down, wants to do the research out in the field. She's listening. She has her psychological wounds, and it mingles into the calling. That doesn't mean that the whole thing is neurotic, but we are complicated creatures, and what really drives us is both plus and minus. What brings us pleasure and joy, delight, ecstatic engagement, and what hurts. We're some mingling of those two poles, and it enters into our character that we are following. She goes into town to buy some thumbtacks, you know, the map, the pins, and okay. Has a beer in the little shelter there for we're way out in a village in Puerto Rico. And there's another expat there, somebody obviously not a local. It's Matthew McConaughey, good casting, and he's out there to do some research for the impact of this scientific endeavor on the local people. He's not exactly a social worker, he's a writer, and some local refers to him as father, and she says, "Are you a priest?" He says, "No, I didn't go through with it. I'm a man of the cloth without the cloth." So there's a very religious figure in our story, and we'll carry that projection, that thread through the story. And we have a little bit of a romance here, science, religion, dating, okay, not merging yet, but she takes him out to see the big antenna, and it's moonlight, and it's pretty romantic and all, but she pulls away rather quickly. This brush with divinity does not last long. She pulls away. She's already married. Well, she's taken. Her work, her calling is consuming. And that's what she goes, she leaves their romantic time together because it's her shift, because it's 24 hours. And she's on at 10:30, so she's got to scramble. And how will I reach you? Oh, yeah, leave your number. I'll call you. She's not going to call. She doesn't save the slip of paper. We quickly learn that the funding for this big enterprise that is her life's work has been cut. Her former dissertation advisor doesn't think it's a good investment of government taxpayer money to be listening for little green men. He makes little jokes at her expense when we finally meet him. Okay, what to do? Her right-hand man, who happens to be blind, which is an interesting metaphor for a story about connecting, and he's able to pick up on things that other people miss. But he said, well, there is the other way to listen. The very large array out in the desert, these huge dishes that turn, and but we don't have any funding. We could get time on that if we could pay for it. And now she spends 13 months trying to raise money, and finally does get some money from this eccentric billionaire. Think Howard Hughes or somebody that is seldom seen, and she doesn't meet him, but she gets the money and she's out there. He is a trickster figure and gradually becomes her fairy godfather because he comes through, and he's strange enough to get that there might be some value in this where anybody who thinks clearly doesn't. Fortunately, he's very, very rich. A trickster is that energy that comes in when you're really stuck and finds another door. I encourage joke telling. Joke telling is trickster activity. And what does it do? It starts something up, and then it goes to a pun, or it goes into something that wasn't where your mind, it directs your mind, the setup, gets you thinking one direction, then it comes over here. And there's a little delight or annoyance, depending on how bad it is. But it's a certain kind of mental exercise, and it's done in creativity workshops intentionally. Yes, people do this for scientific reasons and study the reactions to it. So she's out there, and then her assistant tells her, okay, our funding is in place because you got the connection with H.S. Haddon is this eccentric guy's name, but the government owns this facility, and Drumlin, your old adversary, the one who cut off the funds down in Puerto Rico, he is turning off our access. So even though we're willing to pay for it, they won't let us use the dishes anymore. We have 3 months left. Well, this is movie drama, so a little tension, but of course something's going to happen in those 3 months because otherwise, where would the movie go? It'd be a very short movie. Okay, so she hears something. it doesn't sound like much to the people watching the movie. It's kind of a thumping, thump, thump, thump. But she detects a pattern. It's prime numbers. Well, you wouldn't just, a little static in the universe wouldn't generate a meaningful pattern of numbers like that. And she says, that is somebody saying, hello, we're smart too. So they start recording things. Okay, now the government shows up. Now the government is interested. And now this standing in the foreground here with his arm out in the dark suit, that's Drumlin, Dr. David Drumlin, advisor to the president. He's worked up his way up from Caltech to high reaches of power. Okay, now these things that he was wanting to slash are very interesting because they're important, because he could be important. Not that Ellie will get much credit. He's going to step in and, well, because he was technically sort of giving permission, so he wasn't involved at all, but he'll take all the questions and get the spotlight because this is politics. By the way, over his shoulder in a black suit crossing his arms, the actor James Wood, you might recognize from the picture. He's the bad guy. He's going to be our villain. He is the national security advisor. All he sees is danger. Oh, wait, we're in touch with something? Do they have military intention? And he has people with guns and uniforms and things around, and she says, could your guys with the guns step outside? This is a civilian project here, and he does briefly, and then he has them come back in. That's the part of us that is afraid of all of this. When you see debates about possible alien contact, there are pretty much two schools. There's a spectrum, but over on this side of the spectrum are all the people that are afraid of it. Mind control, they want to kidnap us, they want to take over the government, they want to exploit our resources, they want to kill us all. And you have the horror movie genre. I don't watch those, but I know they exist. And then you have the optimistic ones like this. Maybe they've got something to teach us. Clearly, if they could reach us, they've got technology that's beyond ours. That's immediately a good thing if they're kindly. And what's that all about? Which is it? And do I want to show of hand? No. It's whatever you see. That is, whatever we see. If we're fearful, we see danger. If we're hopeful, we see prospects. It's in the eye of the beholder. Well, the word gets out, and she's in some trouble with the secrecy people. This was an important government secret, and at this one moment, her old mentor, now rival, steps in and said she had to get the word out. She had to alert the other stations around the world, or we would lose the contact. Okay, so she's not in trouble yet. But that means the word got out. That means around the array, mobs have come. Thousands and thousands of people gathering. There's an Elvis imitator. He says Vega or bust. For some reason, the signal seems to come from an area near the star Vega, which is confusing to the scientists because that's a fairly newish star and possibly planetary system, and surely something would come from an older part of space. Well, there's a lot of confusion going here. And there's a preacher among the mob here who's talking about this is not from God, this is the devil's work. I mean, he's the dark, fearful type, and he's really gripping, and he's got a big mob out there. Meanwhile, her blind associate has been looking at these signals and says, those little interstitial moments, there's documentation in there. And they have some kind of symbolic pages, lots and lots of pages. I think it's 63,000 pages. Anyway, lots of pages that they can't decode. They don't know what to make of. They don't know what sequence they go in. They don't know what they represent. Her funder, her trickster, fairy godfather mentor gets in touch with her, and they have a meeting. She hasn't seen him before. And he's smirking. He's pleased with him and he said, back before I became so important, I was a halfway decent engineer, And she said, you figured it out. You've got the primer. And he has. He's broken the code. What he figured out was these aren't pages like in a book. They are pyramidal space. And if you tip them a certain way, what he did was open up another dimension. This is the step of creativity. When we see something from a perspective we just weren't considering, same material in front of us. Oh, wait, if you connect it this way. There were these little 3-part guide points in the edge of the page. He said, you've got to tip them this way. And then you see what they're getting at. What they are plans for a machine, some kind of machine. A machine you can travel in. Oh, if there's thumping around, it might be Melanie moving around, or it might be latecomers landing on the roof in their flying saucers. So this amazing code and this amazing, and it's going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars if we wanted to make it. So all of the planets all of the nations on Earth would have to cooperate if we wanted to do this. Pretty exciting prospect, but it means world peace. It means we'd have to cooperate. And that's an implication of these stories, that we are actually together on this planet. First of all, we're Earthlings before we're Americans or Russians or what have you. The aliens or whatever this intelligence, whoever has sent this message has gone to a great deal of trouble just to say hello. Notice that I'm mainly focusing on us. I know it's interesting out there, but what's immediate is our reaction to this kind of vague information. And we quarrel among ourselves, and then, at least in this story, we pull together. So we've got to go to Washington, D.C. That's where decisions are made, and actually the President of the United States is shown in, it's Clinton, it's an older movie. There was some science going on during the Clinton, where they thought they had detected some kind of life on Mars. And he did a long press conference and he talked about this. They grabbed the press conference, they clipped out the parts about Mars, and they had him talking about this amazing scientific breakthrough. And so he's right there, and it seems like the cast is right there. Well, they've got some monitors around. So it cuts to the podium, and it cuts to the monitor, and Arroway and Drumlin and all the other cast members are standing. So it's all in the same room. The White House was actually annoyed. They said, you actually should have cleared that, which they didn't. They just grabbed it. But it's sort of, out there in the public. Somebody's going to have to be the pilot, well, more like a passenger. Somebody will be in this machine and will go wherever it takes them. One person. In the novel, it's more, but for the movie, it's one person. And they have the prime candidates. And Ellie Arroway, who knows more about this than anybody, is on the list. So is her rival. So is David Drumlin. And there's a big hearing. And now, her old boyfriend, that religious guy from the jungle, has risen. He wrote a bestseller. He's become an advisor to the president on science and faith. And he's one of the panelists. And she's about to be cleared to be the key person in this adventure. And he said, "Do you believe in God?" He knows she doesn't, because they've had these conversations. And she says, I'm a scientist. I tend to believe in data. She's saying no. And somebody else on the panel says 95% of the world believes in God. If we're sending a representative, this wouldn't be a representative. I challenge the number. I don't think 95% of the world does believe in God, but this is a movie. She loses the job, and her rival, her old thesis advisor, he's the one, and he's all ego. And he's showboating, and they're setting up the machine, and the TV cameras are on. He says, "Oh, and let me point out this one thing." And the people back in the control room say, "Can we say grandstanding? This man really knows he's on television, and he's working it. He's getting all the attention you could possibly get." And then the whole thing blows up. You remember that preacher from the mob around the very large array? Well, he thought it was the devil's work, and he got a whole set of explosives under his uniform that he stole somehow, got in close enough to blow the whole thing up, including David Drumlin. When you don't get something you want, consider that maybe that's for some good reason. Maybe that will work out okay. She really wanted that position and was cheated out of it. He even kind of mentioned it in a line of dialogue that, yeah, I know the world's really not fair, is it? I mean, he just stole this thing that really rightly belonged to her and died for his trouble. So what has died? If we're staying figurative, what is that? Well, that part of us just died. The ego-driven, the showboater, the grandstand, the need for attention, the self-importance. And maybe that's just as well. Get that out of the way if we're going to get into deep water here, if we're going to some place of real importance. Haddon, her trickster benefactor, gets in touch with her and said, "Well, I figured out how to get all those contracts. My company's built that machine. And I charged an enormous profit." And I used all the profit to build a backup machine on a remote island in the north of Japan, and all my Japanese branches of my corporations, it's all there, and their staff are all trained, and we're ready to go. And I don't go through some government deciding you're the one that's going. So, okay, that got back in chain. And here we are into the heart of the machine now. This is the machine, which is kind of a pod. There's these big spinning wheels. It's very mandala-like, the unifying sacred pattern. And this thing this globe, which is like a cosmic egg, will sort of drop through this, and it picks up some kind of energy field. And we can't understand how it works, but we have built it to these specs. So if it works, we're being guided by planners better than ourselves. And she gets on board, and the thing drops. Well, it's pretty exciting. Things are rattling, and there's so many cameras on recording devices, and one of them's on her head. They're going to get this, whatever happens. And she said, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what that rattling is, and I'll just try to keep describing and try to keep filming so we can know what is going on here. The metal, it's an all-metal sphere, starts to become translucent, and then she can see light through it, like the whole thing. Well, we don't have any physics that allows metal to turn into glass, but anyway, this is a sci-fi movie. She can see. She's going through some kind of a tunnel. It's a wormhole. It's a scientific speculation. That's an interesting notion that maybe there's a way to go great distances by sort of cutting through the physical space. I don't understand it, but the movie depends on it. So we're going down this tunnel, and it's also kind of a birth canal, and we lose contact. Ground control is freaking out. It just started. It's only been a moment, and we don't have contact. She's talking to them and telling how beautiful the stars and the thing. She says, you really should have said a poet. I don't have the words to tell you how extraordinary this is. Interesting notion. Maybe they should train astronauts and people doing this kind of thing in poetic language if they're going to see things that we need to know about. Pictures help, but a good description would be great. And then the pod disappears. Well, we don't really understand how this works. Meanwhile, we're watching her. And she's seeing some kind of planet. It seems maybe there are planets near Vega, we don't really know. And a VLA, a very large array, the kind of dish farm that she was working on out in New Mexico. There's one on this other planet, a huge, oh, yeah, they do have a very big antenna. That's how they pick things up. And then she's on a beach. On a beach that looks a lot like Pensacola, no, it looks a lot like her drawing of Pensacola, Florida. Now, by the way, these space travel, alien encounter movies have lots of implications, one of which is encountering aliens on this planet. Otherness, people that are unlike us, not little green men, but different. These stories can help us flex our intercultural muscles. If we can imagine listening without fear to messages from Vega and accepting an invitation to visit another world, let us celebrate the act of truly listening to members of other races, to members of other communities whose experiences may challenge our assumptions. The cosmic perspective enlarges the heart. You know, when the astronauts first saw Earth from outer space, they described the overview effect, a shift in consciousness, a moment when national borders dissolve and humanity appears as one fragile family. But back to our story. We're in Pensacola, Florida on the beach, or so it seems until she touches it. She doesn't reach all the way over to the palm tree. She just touches right here, and it all shimmers. It's some kind of a trick. It's some kind of a 3D projection, the whole thing. They have gone into her memories and created this. And then there's a sort of blurry figure walking toward her on the beach, and it takes a moment for it to come into focus. Yes, alien as wise father figure. We knew she had parental loss issues. Is this dad? and she talks to her. Let's stop and reflect for a moment. All of this advanced technology just to have a father-daughter reunion. But, there's this South Park episode. Mr. Garrison, the teacher, I don't know how many of you like South. I love South Park. It is so mean, so rude, so funny. Okay, Mr. Garrison is a sci-fi fan, and he goes to see Contact. And he said, of course, I want to see the alien. Waited that entire movie to see the alien, and it was her damn father. Not a happy moviegoer. So here are lines from the film in this conversation. She is talking to what looks like her father. None of this is real. And he says, that's my scientist. You downloaded my memories. We thought it might make things easier for you. Where are there others? Many others. They all travel here through that transit system you built. We didn't build it. We don't know who did. They were gone long before we ever got here. And then this alien, who looks like the actor David Morse, who's a very kindly presence. You're an interesting species, an interesting mix. You're capable of such beautiful dreams and such horrible nightmares. You feel so lost, so cut off, so alone. Only you're not. In all our searching, we've found that what makes the emptiness bearable is each other. Well, that's the punchline of the movie right there. That's about this here. That's about connecting with these strange people. I don't need to go meet little green men. I go to Unitarian meetings. I mean, enough human diversity to keep it interesting for my lifetime. So she asks, what happens now? And he answers, now you go home. Home, but I have so many questions. There's a stage in the mythic journey called the refusal of the return. You get to a very interesting place and you just want to stay. But that's not how it works. The seeker is to bring back the report. She's not there just for herself. She's there for us. She's there to learn and bring, and so you have to come back. And sometimes it's really interesting and cool and you want to stay. Not how it works. So she asks, and she moves along here, do we get to come back? And he seems to reassure her. It's vague, but he seems to say yes. This was just a first step. In time, you'll take another. And she says, but other people need to see what I've seen. This is the way it's been done for billions of years. Small moves, Ellie, small moves, which was a phrase he used when she was impatient at the ham radio at 9 years old. Science, any kind of exploration, any kind of learning is very incremental. Be patient with yourself, with the process. Small moves. So we've looked at these images. They make it easier for us. The ultimate boon of all our discoveries is to find the meaning of life. Well, maybe she found a little scrap of it. Aliens have held our God projections. After all, we're looking to the sky for revelation. It's very similar to religious stories. These are religious stories. This is hope or fear for something larger, smarter, older than us, our creators. And we are also looking for whatever we haven't discovered in ourselves yet, the alien as the other within. And then she returns, actually wakes up on the floor of the pod. The process has knocked her out somehow. From ground control, pod has reappeared. It was only gone a moment. It was just the time to fall through this machine. There's a big net at the bottom. She's fine. She's okay. And mission control is calling to her, and she says, what day is it? How long have I been gone? And they said, you haven't been gone. It's only been a moment from the beginning of the process. Well, this small thing, this momentary drop, is the distance between here and the star Vega. This is huge. Well, this isn't very measurable. We're talking about the enormity of space. We're also talking about the vastness of the imagination, the inner galaxies that are beyond our grasp. There is such largeness of possibility. Oh, and the camera didn't get it. All the cameras, all the recording devices, just static. So we're left in mystery. I can relate. My gizmos never work when I really need them to. A few seconds. So there's a hearing. This is a government-funded process. There's a big room, and she's being grilled. She has no evidence, but I know this has happened. You expect us, on your word, and here's her speech. I had an experience. I can't prove it. I can't even explain it. But everything I know as a human being, everything I am, tells me it was real. I was given something wonderful, something that changed me forever, a vision of the universe that tells us undeniably how tiny and insignificant and how rare and precious we all are. Ellie, our protagonist, our representative, we have touched mastery of two worlds. She is still a scientist. She knows what concrete data is like. And she has seen the mystery. She holds it inside. Intellect and intuition are now merged. Mind, body, spirit, matter, control, that is, thinking, creativity, all merged. She is the meeting place for the duration of the story. So it's just a suggestion that such a thing might be possible. She has had subjective experience. Now she gets resistance from a panel of important people and others on the planet that will not welcome this information, which also represent her own resistance, the part of her that says, I'm a scientist, this doesn't make sense. I don't want this to be. I don't want to know this. That struggle, that's going to go on for a while. Oh, and by the way, if you have an extraordinary experience, be real careful who you tell. Not everyone will be receptive. She does get reception. Palmer Joss, this religious writer that he is there because he's on the panel because he's now an important person in Washington. He believes her. Well, he knows something about matters of faith. He can take this in. He's got the bandwidth because he thinks differently than government officials and scientists. And so they leave the building together. Supporters gather. Their relationship, which is going to work out. It's a movie. There is the merging of the pairs of opposites. Matter and spirit coexist in a continuous dance of creativity. And the movie seems kind of over, but there's this little sort of coda moment. It cuts to a woman named Rachel Constantine, who's been one of the governmental players, a key advisor to the president. And she's on a video call with that fellow played by James Wood, who's the national security advisor. His character's name is Michael Kitts. And she said, Michael, you read the confidential report from the investigating committee? So not all was said in the hearing. I did. She goes on, I was very interested in the section on Arroway's video unit, the one attached to her head, the one that recorded the static. The fact that it recorded static is not what interests me. What interested me is that it recorded approximately 18 hours of it. The end of the story is we're back out at the VLA. The government is now funding it, and we're back to listening. So at the end, we chop wood and carry water. We go back to work. There's more to be heard. There's more contact to be hoped for. There's a school bus out there and some school children, and she's encouraging them to go into science. The journey, the story, helped her be at peace with traumatic events in her life. She found some missing parts of herself. She got to talk to her father. There is a stage in initiatory lore about atonement with the Father, and that is reconnecting whatever bruises, and there's always bruises, whatever disagreements, and finding some peace. It doesn't mean agreeing. It means compassion. It means finding the ability to hold differences, even with people that we have had difficult experiences with. So what does this story teach us? That science and faith are not necessarily adversaries, that authentic experience is a kind of proof in its own right, that the longing itself is holy in its way, that grief can be a gateway. Sometimes it opens us up to something of great value, even though it's not fun. Action steps. Practice small moves. Do what you can do today to move your perspective forward. Psyche doesn't do quantum leaps, it does quiet increments. Find a listening post. You don't have to have the huge dish in Puerto Rico or the big array of dishes. Some ritual of openness, ocean walks, journaling, meditation, stargazing, quiet reflection, reading in the wisdom traditions, or just turning off the notifications for a little while. Listening opens the inner cosmos. This is a practice of vastness, a contemplation of a larger picture. Let wonder expand your tolerance for ambiguity. Okay, another one, hold skepticism and wonder together. When faced with mystery, say, let me doubt wisely, let me wonder bravely. When we imagine contact with others, think of what qualities they might carry, these aliens. Courage, curiosity, protection, innovation. Translate the image into a virtue that we can practice in the here and now. It doesn't have to be way out there, way out in the future. And the last is about cross-cultural conversation. You don't have to go to Vega to have conversation with somebody with very different experiences and perspectives. Seek out conversations with someone whose racial or cultural background is different. Seek gatherings with people from different backgrounds, faith, ethnicity, age, profession. Practice deep listening. Ask curiosity-first questions. This is Earth's version of first contact. The goal is not to agree, just to understand. Approach as you would a signal from the stars, with humility, attentiveness, and wonder. Whether you believe in extraterrestrial intelligence or simply appreciate the poetry of these ideas, may you welcome the creative, courageous, compassionate dimensions of your own soul. May you treat the stranger and strange ideas, earthly or otherwise, with reverence. May your skepticism stay kind and your wonder stay grounded. And may the stories we tell of lights, guidance, contact, train us for the everyday miracle of meeting one another as we were from other worlds. In closing, may you listen deeply to the stars, to your own heart, and to the quiet wisdom between the two. May your longing guide you, your curiosity steady you, and your courage open doors where none seem to exist. May you journey far in spirit and return with stories that make the universe a little less lonely. And until your next moment of realization, of epiphany, of contact, small moves, friends, small moves. Namaste. Blessed be. And so it goes. Words will appear.